This is what happens to cheaters.
I'm David Morrison, 41 years old, and 3 years back my wife decided to announce her affair at the worst possible moment imaginable. I was regional director for a hotel chain called Atlantic Crown Properties, overseeing 15 locations stretching from Maine down to Georgia. Corner office overlooking Boston Harbor, the whole corporate success package. My wife Victoria was from Toronto, came down 12 years ago with that polished Canadian professionalism that made investors comfortable and employees feel valued. We'd been married 9 years when everything imploded. Victoria had a son from her first marriage, Ethan, who was 14 at the time. I'd been in his life since he was 5 years old. I taught that kid to ride a bicycle, sat through every parent-teacher conference, paid for his orthodontic work. He called me David instead of Dad, but I never pushed the issue. I figured love showed up in actions rather than titles, and I was there for him consistently. The celebration dinner was meant to honor a massive deal I'd been working on for 18 months. We'd just closed the acquisition of 3 boutique properties in Charleston, and my late father's business partner, Gerald, had flown in from Phoenix specifically for the occasion. 20 people gathered at the Harborview, our flagship property in the portfolio. White tablecloths, champagne already poured, lobster bisque coming out from the kitchen. I was halfway through thanking everyone who'd contributed to the deal when Victoria stood up. She wore this emerald dress, the exact one I'd purchased for our anniversary 6 months prior. Her smile was bright and practiced, the kind she deployed at corporate events. She announced she had something to say, and I looked up at her still holding my champagne glass, thinking maybe she planned to toast the team or thank everyone for their support. Gerald raised his eyebrows in an encouraging way. Instead, Victoria announced she'd been doing extensive soul-searching lately and realized she'd been living inauthentically. Said she'd been in a relationship that no longer served her personal growth. The room went completely silent. Someone's fork touched their plate with a small clink that seemed deafening in that moment. Then she said she'd been seeing someone else, a guy named Derek who'd helped her understand she deserved to be with someone who truly saw her. She looked around the room, but her eyes never quite landed on me when she said she was grateful for everything, but needed to be honest with everyone there. Said our marriage was over. I felt every single eye turn toward me. Gerald's face went pale. My assistant Claire looked like she might actually cry. But I didn't move, didn't shout, didn't ask any questions. I just set down my glass carefully, pulled my wallet from my jacket and placed my credit card on the table. Told the server, separate checks. I signed the receipt and added a 30% tip because none of this disaster was the staff's fault. Then I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked straight out of that restaurant without looking back even once. Behind me, I heard Gerald's chair scrape harshly against the floor, heard him say something sharp to Victoria. But I was already gone, already moving forward with the plan I'd been preparing for over a year. See, here's what nobody tells you about loving someone capable of public betrayal. You don't wait around for the bomb to drop. You build your bunker first. The storage unit smelled like concrete and old cardboard when I arrived. I'd rented it 14 months earlier under the name David Harrison, paid cash for a full year up front, told the manager I was storing inventory for a side business venture. He didn't ask questions. People rarely do when you show up with several $100s in cash and a story that sounds boring enough to be believable. Inside, I'd stashed everything I needed for this exact moment. A duffel bag containing clothes, toiletries, 2 pairs of work boots, and a laptop with heavily encrypted files. $47,000 in cash pulled from dividend payments on a small, limited liability company my father had established before he died. Victoria didn't know about it, had never asked about my father's estate beyond the hotel properties, never cared about the quarterly paperwork I signed. I changed out of my expensive suit right there in the dim fluorescent light, pulled on jeans and a flannel shirt, laced up the boots, left the Tom Ford jacket hanging on a hook like some shed skin from my previous life. Then I drove my Mercedes to a commuter parking lot off Route 95, locked it up, left the keys in the wheel well, and walked 3 blocks to where I'd parked my backup vehicle 2 weeks earlier. A beat-up 2001 Ford pickup truck, primer gray, registered to David Harrison, paid for in cash from some guy in Quincy who was just happy to see it go. It started on the second try, belched smoke and sounded like it had bronchitis. Absolutely perfect. I stopped at a gas station outside Providence and bought a prepaid flip phone. Made one call to Michael Patterson, my lawyer and the closest thing I had to a brother since our college days. He answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep, asking what was so important at 1 a.m. I told him it was time. He didn't hesitate, just asked about the documents. I told him to file everything we'd discussed first thing in the morning. He asked if I was absolutely sure because once this started, there'd be no walking it back. I told him I'd never been more certain of anything in my entire life. By dawn, I was checked into a motel in New Hampshire under the name David Harrison. The room had wallpaper from 1987 and a mattress that groaned when I sat on it. The view was a parking lot and a Dunkin' Donuts. I lay on that bed fully clothed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and thought about Ethan. The kid didn't ask for any of this chaos, didn't ask for his mother to be who she was, didn't ask for me to walk away from his life. But I couldn't stay. Not for him, not for anyone. Because if I stayed, I'd become the kind of man who accepts betrayal just to keep the furniture arrangement intact. Michael sent an encrypted email at 6:23 that morning with a single line stating documents filed. That meant Victoria would find out by noon, maybe sooner if she tried accessing any of our joint accounts. The checking account, the savings, the investment portfolio tied to the hotel management company, all of it locked behind clauses she'd signed 9 years ago and probably never actually read. Our prenuptial agreement, page 17, subsection D, stated that in the event of verified infidelity by either party, all jointly held assets would revert to the non-offending spouse's sole control, pending dissolution proceedings. We'd signed it 2 weeks before the wedding. Victoria had laughed at the time, called it overkill and excessive paranoia, said she'd never cheat. I believed her back then. My father had insisted on it anyway, and I'd followed his advice. I pulled out a manila envelope I'd been carrying in that duffel bag for over a year. It had been in my father's safe deposit box, marked with my name and a date, instructions to open only if necessary. I'd opened it 6 months earlier, the night I'd confirmed what Victoria was actually doing behind my back. Inside was a letter in my father's handwriting, shaky from the illness that eventually eliminated him. He wrote that if I was reading this, then something had gone wrong, either with business or with love. Probably love. Said he'd married my mother when he was 23 and divorced her when he was 30. She'd been beautiful and ambitious, and somewhere along the way forgot they were supposed to be partners instead of competitors. He told me not to let guilt trap me, not to let anyone convince me that staying was noble when leaving was actually survival. Said he knew I was loyal to a fault, but that loyalty without reciprocity was just volunteering to drown. He explained he'd set up a secondary limited liability company under Harrison Industries, with dividends going to an account only I could access. Told me to use it, disappear if I needed to, build something new. Said for God's sake, don't let anyone make me feel weak for choosing myself. The letter was signed simply, Love, Dad. I read it 3 times that morning, then folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. My father had somehow known this day would eventually come. My burner email started getting forwarded notifications. The old iPhone was dead by now, drowned under the faucet back at the house. But I'd set up automatic forwarding before I left. 17 missed calls from Victoria, 12 text messages, 3 voicemails. I didn't listen to any of them because I already knew exactly what they'd say. Confusion first, then anger, then accusations that I was overreacting and being childish, that we needed to talk like adults. But here's the thing about talking. It requires 2 people who actually respect each other. And respect once shattered doesn't glue itself back together just because someone says sorry. I sent a text to Michael asking how long until Victoria figured out the visa situation. His response came fast. His immigration attorney contact estimated 3 weeks. Victoria was on a spousal visa, and divorce would terminate it. She'd have 90 days to leave the country or find another legal path to residency. I stared at that message for a long time. Victoria had come to the States on a work visa 12 years ago, shifted to a spousal visa when we married. If the marriage dissolved, so did her legal status. I hadn't specifically planned that part, just followed the law. But consequences don't care about intent. I didn't watch Victoria's social media spiral in real time, but Michael sent me screenshots with timestamps, clinical updates like a doctor monitoring a patient's decline. Day 1. Victoria posted a video with soft lighting and acoustic guitar in the background. She sat cross-legged on our couch, the one we'd picked out together at a boutique furniture store in Cambridge. Titled it, Choosing Honesty Over Comfort, My Journey to Authentic Living. She talked for 11 minutes about personal growth and awakening and finding her true self. Mentioned Derek, her new partner, called him a mirror that showed her who she really was. Never once said the word affair or betrayal, just framed the entire situation as self-discovery and evolution. The comments were mixed. Some of her wellness influencer friends cheered her on, called it brave and radical honesty. But others, people who knew me and had been at that dinner, they weren't buying it. One comment stood out saying, "You humiliated your husband in public and called it growth. That's not brave, that's cruel." Day 3. Victoria tried calling the hotel chain's corporate office. Michael had already notified them of the situation and told them I was taking an indefinite leave of absence. They forwarded her call to legal. Legal told her they couldn't discuss personnel matters. She posted a vague Instagram story about being shut out of conversations that directly affect your life. Day 5. She tried accessing our joint bank account and found it locked. Called the bank, and they told her the account was flagged pending legal review. She called Michael's office. His assistant told her all communication had to go through official channels. That's when Victoria actually called the police and filed a wellness check. I was sitting in a diner in Vermont, eating a turkey sandwich and reading a book about woodworking when Michael called. Said Victoria had filed a wellness check, told the cops I'd disappeared and she was worried I might hurt myself. The police found my Mercedes at the commuter lot, ran the plates, saw no red flags. Called Michael because I'd listed him as my attorney of record. He told them I was on a planned sabbatical, that I'd checked in with him that morning and that I was under absolutely no legal obligation to inform my estranged spouse of my whereabouts. Michael said to get used to hearing her called estranged spouse, because Victoria was going to realize soon that she had zero leverage in this situation. No access to money, no access to me, and a visa that was about to expire. I asked how long until immigration noticed. He estimated 2 weeks, maybe 3. Once the divorce was finalized, her visa status would get reviewed automatically. If she couldn't prove independent means or find another path to legal residency, she was looking at deportation proceedings. Day 8. Victoria's video view counts started dropping significantly. The algorithm moved on to other content. Her follower count dipped. A wellness brand she'd been partnering with quietly pulled her affiliate link from their website. Day 10. She posted a tearful video with no makeup this time, hair pulled back sitting in the guest bedroom. Said she was learning that honesty comes with consequences she didn't anticipate. Said she thought she was being brave, but maybe she was just being selfish. Said she didn't know anymore. The comments were noticeably harsher. People wrote that she destroyed a good man and expected applause. That actions have consequences. Welcome to reality. She deleted the video 6 hours later. On day 12, Michael sent me a final update, saying Victoria had hired an immigration lawyer and was trying to argue for an extension based on hardship. He said flatly, it wasn't going to work because she'd made her choices and now had to live with them. 3 weeks into my disappearance, I got a message I genuinely didn't expect. It came through an old gaming platform, Discord, on an account I'd created years ago to play some strategy game with Ethan. We'd stopped using it when he got into high school and moved on to other interests. I'd completely forgotten the login existed until my laptop pinged with a notification. The message was from Ethan, asking if I was there. I stared at the screen for a full minute. Smart kid. Had found a way to reach me that completely bypassed Victoria. I typed back that I was here. Ethan's next message came quickly, saying his mom was losing it, that she kept calling my office and they wouldn't tell her anything. I responded that I knew. He asked if I was okay. That question hit harder than I'd expected. I sat back in the chair and looked around the cabin I was renting. Was I okay? I didn't know yet. I typed that I was managing and asked about him. Ethan wrote back that Victoria cried a lot, and Derek had moved in, and he hated him. My jaw tightened reading that. Derek, the artist. The mirror who showed Victoria her true self was now living in the house I'd paid for, sleeping in the bed I'd bought, probably eating dinners at the table where Ethan did his homework. I typed that I was sorry. His response came fast, saying it wasn't my fault, she did this. I stared at those words. From a 14-year-old who just watched his mother implode his family for the second time in his life. I asked if he needed anything, money or help with school. Ethan wrote no, that Michael had set up something for him, an account for college. Said Michael told him I'd arranged it. Michael hadn't told me he'd done that. I'd asked him to make sure Ethan had options, but didn't know he'd moved that quickly. I responded that Ethan deserved to have options, and whatever happened between me and his mother didn't change that. Ethan asked if he could visit me sometime. My throat tightened. I wanted to say yes, wanted to give this kid an escape route from whatever chaos Victoria was creating. But I also knew that opening that door meant staying connected to a life I was actively trying to leave behind. I typed carefully, saying when he turned 18, he could go anywhere he wanted, but until then, this was complicated. He responded that he understood. I sent one more message telling him he was a good kid, better than most adults I knew, and not to let this situation make him cynical. His final message said, "Too late." Then he logged off before I could respond. Michael called an hour later. I asked about the trust he'd set up for Ethan. He said I'd told him to make sure the kid had options, so he'd made sure. I asked how much. He said enough for 4 years at any state school, maybe more if Ethan was smart with it. The trust was completely untouchable by Victoria. Ethan would get it when he turned 18, or earlier if he needed it for verified educational expenses. I thanked him quietly. 4 weeks in, Victoria finally understood the full situation she was in. Michael forwarded me an email from her attorney, some guy named Paul who worked out of a strip mall office in Somerville. The email was frantic, full of legal jargon that boiled down to pure panic. Michael called to walk me through it. Victoria's lawyer was claiming the prenup was invalid because she'd signed under duress, that my father had pressured her, and she didn't have independent legal counsel. I pointed out that she did have her own lawyer, a guy named Richard Feldman out of Cambridge, and I'd paid for it. Michael said that's exactly what he'd told them, sent copies of the retainer agreement Victoria had signed, the consultation notes, everything. They had absolutely nothing to stand on. I asked about the visa situation. Michael said that's where it got interesting. Immigration had sent Victoria a notice giving her 60 days to prove she had legal grounds to remain in the country. The spousal visa terminated with the divorce, and since the divorce was based on documented infidelity, there was no pathway to adjustment of status. She had to leave unless she found another legal route like a work visa or student visa. But those took time and money, and right now, she had neither. 2 days later, Victoria posted another video. This one, markedly different. No soft lighting, no music, just her sitting in the guest bedroom with red eyes and smudged makeup. Said she'd made mistakes, thought she was being brave but was really just being selfish. Said now she was facing consequences she didn't anticipate. Her visa was expiring, she might have to leave the country, and Ethan was caught in the middle of something he didn't ask for. She paused and wiped her eyes, then looked directly at the camera, asking me to please contact her. Said we needed to talk. Not about us, but about Ethan. Said he needed stability and help. Acknowledged she didn't deserve anything from me, but insisted Ethan did. The video had 200 views and 15 comments. Most were brutal. People wrote she should have thought about her son before blowing up her marriage. That actions meet consequences. Welcome to adulthood. One comment said, "Using your kid to manipulate your ex is pretty low, even for you." Michael called that night, saying Victoria was trying to bait me and I shouldn't respond. I told him I wasn't going to, but added that if Ethan needed something, I'd handle it. Michael promised the trust was set up properly, and if Ethan needed housing, education, anything legitimate, it was covered. But I shouldn't contact Victoria or give her any opening. I said I understood. 3 years. That's how long it took for the dust to actually settle. I'd rebuilt myself piece by piece during that time. The cabin in New Hampshire became permanent. I bought it outright under David Harrison, paid cash, no paper trail leading back to David Morrison. Started working with my hands instead of spreadsheets. Picked up woodworking first, then carpentry. then discovered driftwood sculpture almost by accident. There was this old guy in town named Bill who taught me the basics: how to see the shape hiding inside weathered wood, how to let the material guide you instead of forcing it. I started making small pieces and selling them at local craft fairs. Nothing fancy, just honest work that didn't require conference calls or corporate politics. The hotels sold. Michael handled it quietly, found a buyer who wanted the entire portfolio. I walked away with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life if I stayed modest. Invested most of it conservatively, kept some liquid, donated a significant chunk to a scholarship fund in my father's name. Victoria got deported. Took 11 months total, but immigration finally processed everything. She tried every possible angle, hired 3 different lawyers, even attempted to claim asylum based on some fabricated story about persecution in Canada. None of it worked. She flew back to Toronto on a cold January morning, and according to Michael, she never stopped blaming me for everything. Ethan stayed in the States. His biological father, a guy I'd never actually met, suddenly developed a conscience and took custody. They moved to Colorado together. Ethan and I kept in touch through that Discord channel, messages every few weeks. He was doing okay. Not great, but okay. He applied to art schools, and the trust Michael set up covered everything. I changed my name legally. Not completely, but just enough. David Harford, instead of David Morrison. Got a new driver's license. Opened bank accounts. Filed taxes. Became someone new without completely erasing who I'd been. The magazine article happened completely by accident. Some writer doing a piece on coastal artists found my work at a gallery in Portsmouth. She wanted to interview the guy making sculptures from beach debris. I agreed, but kept everything vague. Talked about starting over and finding clarity, but never mentioned Victoria or the hotels. The article ran in a small regional publication. I genuinely didn't think anyone would notice it. The beach was empty that morning, the kind of quiet you only get before sunrise. I was working on a new piece, something abstract with curves that mimicked wave patterns. The wood was silver gray, smoothed by years of salt water and sand. I heard footsteps behind me but didn't turn around. Tourists sometimes wandered down here, took photos, moved on. But these footsteps stopped and hesitated. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 3 years cut through the sound of the waves, saying my name. I straightened slowly and turned around. Victoria stood about 20 feet away, wearing jeans and a simple jacket, hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked older and thinner. All the polish was gone, replaced by something raw and uncertain. When our eyes met, something in her expression just shattered completely. Her face went pale, her mouth opened slightly, and I watched 3 years of carefully constructed denial collapse in real time. She'd found me, but she hadn't prepared for what she'd actually find. She said hi, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond immediately, just looked at her. This woman who'd once been my wife, who'd blown up my life in front of everyone I knew, who'd spent 3 years probably imagining this exact moment. I said hi back, eventually, with no emotion, no anger, just simple acknowledgement. She took a tentative step closer, saying she'd been looking for me, that she'd seen the article and knew it was me. I said, "And now you found me." She wrapped her arms around herself in this defensive gesture I remembered from old arguments. Said she needed to see me, needed to explain. I told her there was nothing to explain, that she'd said everything that night at the restaurant. She said quickly that it was a mistake, the way she did it, the timing, all of it, that she'd regretted it every single day since. I set down the piece of driftwood I was holding and said, "Victoria, I don't care." Those 4 words landed harder than any insult possibly could have. I saw it in her face, the realization that I wasn't angry, wasn't hurt, wasn't anything. I'd moved past her entirely. She said I looked different. I told her I was different. I had to be. She tried saying Ethan missed me. I said Ethan knew how to reach me and we talked. Her face shifted to surprise, mixed with something that looked like betrayal. She said he never told her that. I asked why he would, when she hadn't exactly earned his trust. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She said, "Please, Jason, just please help me understand what I was going through." I told her I understood perfectly. She wanted something different. She got it. Now she was living with the consequences. She asked if that was it. 3 years, and that's all I had to say. I looked at her one more time and asked what she wanted. Forgiveness? Permission to feel better about what she'd done? I couldn't give her either of those things. She just stood there with tears running down her face, and I felt nothing except a distant sort of pity. I said goodbye, Victoria, and picked up the driftwood again. She didn't leave immediately, just stood there for another minute, or maybe 2, waiting for something that wasn't going to come. Then, finally, she turned and walked away. I watched her go for just a moment, then went back to my work. The wood was still there, still needed shaping, and unlike some things, it didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. 8 months after Victoria found me on the beach, my phone rang with Ethan's number. He said without any preamble that he was 18 now, and asked if he could come visit. I smiled for the first time in weeks and told him yes. He showed up 3 days later, driving a beat-up Honda Civic he'd bought with money from his summer job. He was taller than I remembered, broader in the shoulders, but still that same quiet kid who'd rather sketch than talk. We didn't hug, just nodded at each other. He looked around the cabin and at the workshop I'd built, at the half-finished sculptures lined up against the wall. Said simply that it was cool. I said thanks and asked if he was hungry. We ate dinner at a local diner, the kind with checkerboard floors and waitresses who called everyone hun. Ethan ordered a burger and ate methodically, then finally spoke, saying Victoria had come to see me and told him about it. Said she claimed I was cruel to her. I told him I wasn't cruel. I was honest. He nodded slowly and said, that's what he figured. He said Victoria wanted him to ask me to reconsider, to maybe talk to her again. He said he told her he wasn't going to do that. I said good. That was between Victoria and me, and he didn't need to be in the middle of it. He said she was struggling, not defending her, just stating facts, living with her sister in Toronto, working at some boutique, still trying to make the wellness influencer thing work, but nobody cared anymore. I asked how he was doing. He shrugged and said he was okay. His dad was all right. They didn't talk much, but his dad let him do his thing. Then he told me he'd gotten accepted to Rhode Island School of Design, full ride with the trust I'd set up. I told him that was incredible and meant it. He asked why I'd done it, set up the trust when I didn't have to. I said because he deserved a chance, that what Victoria did and what I did, none of that was his fault. He got caught in crossfire. Least I could do was make sure he had options. Ethan's jaw tightened, and he said Victoria claimed I'd abandoned them. I corrected him immediately, told him I abandoned her, not him. There's a difference. He said quietly that he knew, just wanted to hear me say it. We spent the next 3 days fishing and working on a sculpture together, talking about everything except the past. On his last morning, we stood by his car in the driveway. I told him he could come back anytime. Door was always open. He nodded and thanked me for everything, for not being like her. He drove away and I stood there watching until his car disappeared around the bend. A year after Ethan's visit, Michael emailed saying she was gone. I opened it with coffee in hand, early morning light streaming through the cabin windows. The message was brief. Victoria had moved to Vancouver, remarried some tech entrepreneur she'd met through her dwindling social media presence. She'd signed papers relinquishing any future claims to anything connected to me. The hotels, the estate, all of it. In exchange, I'd agreed not to pursue her for the legal fees she still owed from the divorce proceedings. Michael wrote that she'd wanted closure, and figured I'd want to know it was finally done. Life settled into a rhythm after that. I sold pieces at galleries up and down the coast, made enough to live comfortably, bought the lot next to my cabin and built a proper workshop with better tools. Started teaching woodworking to teenagers through a local community center, and turned out I was decent at it. Ethan visited twice a year, always unannounced but always welcome. He graduated from RISD with honors, got a job at a design firm in Providence. Still quiet and thoughtful, but confident now in ways he hadn't been at 14. One afternoon, while we were working on a commission piece together, he asked the question I'd been expecting for years. Asked if I regretted it, walking away like I did. I thought about it honestly, and told him no. I regretted that it had to happen, and regretted that he got hurt, but I didn't regret leaving. Staying would have destroyed me. He nodded with understanding in his eyes. Said Victoria asked about me sometimes. Wanted to know if I was happy. I asked what he told her. He said he told her I was building things, that I was good at it, but didn't tell her anything else because it was none of her business. 18 months later, I met someone. A teacher from the community center. A woman named Grace who taught pottery and had a laugh that reminded me what joy sounded like. We took things slow. No rushing, no promises I couldn't keep. She knew my history, knew I'd been burned, never pushed for more than I could give. Grace met Ethan during one of his visits, and they connected immediately, talking about art and technique and color theory while I made dinner. Watching them interact, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: contentment. That night after Ethan left and Grace went home, I sat on the porch with a beer and looked at the stars. Thought about the man I'd been 5 years ago, standing in that restaurant, watching his wife detonate his life in front of everyone. Thought about the man I'd become, the one who learned that sometimes the only way forward is to burn the bridges behind you completely. Some people say revenge is about making someone pay, but that's not what this was. This was about refusing to let someone else's choices define my worth, about walking away with my dignity intact and building something better from the wreckage. Victoria got her awakening with Derek and whoever came next. That was her journey. I got mine too, just took a different path. Standing there under those stars, beer in hand, workshop full of unfinished projects, phone showing a text from Ethan about his promotion, I realized something important. I'd won. Not because she lost, but because I'd become someone I could actually respect. And in the end, that's the only victory that matters.